So what if Terminator armour but shorter, stockier and more grudging? And of course a fire hose of mortal wounds that they can turn on in the shooting phase. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where we've been taking a look through the Votann Codex units, one unit at a time, and today we've reached the Exo-Armoured elites of the Einhyr Hearthguard, complete with their scary melee weapons and Vulcanite shooting. I think broadly speaking their models have been received fairly well, slightly more ornate runic void suits to show that they're elites, and their extra chunky shoulder pads kind of a callback to previous versions of Terminator armour and the old squats. Today we'll be talking about their 40k rules, looking over their datasheets and best wargear choices, some of the best buffs and synergies to make the unit even more dangerous, and how I think about using them in-game. Jumping straight in then, Einhyr Hearthguard are an elite's choice for the Leagues of Votann, 35 points per model, and you can take 5 to 10 of them in a squad. Perhaps nothing too surprising in their keywords, they are a core infantry unit, and they do have the Exo-Armour and Einhyr keywords which can be handy for some stratagems and synergies. Statline wise, the Exo-Armour does kind of feel like the Votann equivalent of Terminators, a 5-inch move and hitting on 3s, both strength and toughness 5, only 2 wounds, 2 attacks, leadership 8 or 9 on the Hearthguard, and a 2+ save with Void Armour. They don't come with an inbuilt invul save, but the Void Armour should mean that you don't take saves on too bad things anyway, and the Exo-Armour does afford them a bit of extra protection with a -1 damage mechanic baked in, so you're usually going to need a damage 3 shots to one-shot one of these. Compared with Terminators though, only having 2 wounds is a bit of a disadvantage. They're easier to kill with damage 1 weapons and mortal wounds. Weapons wise, you get range and melee weapons. In combat they can either be striking with plasma blade gauntlets for strength 6, AP 3, damage 1, but get an extra attack, so 3 per model, or they can swap that out for a concussion gauntlet for the same cost. That gets them up to strength 8, AP -2 and damage 2, but they do only get the 2 attacks per guy. I'd say it's okay melee damage, though not super standout for the points cost. Honestly, I think that the good bit with these guys is the close range shooting. Each model gets an Exo-Armoured grenade launcher, which is an 18 inches hunter weapon with D6 shots, strength 4, AP -1 and damage 1. And it just means even with a squad of 5 of them, you're pumping out something like 17 or 18 AP -1 shots at that range, and they'll be extra devastating against hordes, a big 6 shots per guy. Then they back that up with a handheld weapon, either an Etikarn plasma gun, which is a single shot at strength 8, AP 4, damage 2 at 24-inch range, quite nice against vehicles, or they can use a Vulcanite disintegrator, 18 inches hunter 3 at strength 5, AP nothing, damage 1, and unusually having a rule where hit rolls of 6 deal a mortal wound instead of normal damage. So basically whenever a squad like this shoots, you can expect a fair amount of mortal wounds unless you roll poorly. Again, we'll compare the two profiles in a second. Then the unit's Hearthguard, which is the sergeant, gets an extra attack, and they've got a few extra wargear choices. You get to choose either a Weaverfield or Teleport crest for free. The Weaverfield one gives you an extra wound and 4+ invul, so a bit more tanky, and allows you to get access to a transhuman physiology stratagem. And then the Teleport crest allows them to deep strike innately, which isn't a bad thing for the slow-moving Votann, but also gives them access to a teleport jump stratagem that means they can bounce around the board later in the game, or potentially do an Alpha Strike turn 1 with a big jump early on. Finally, the Hearthguard can take a concussion hammer, strength ×2, AP -2 and damage 3, but -1 to hit. That one does cost 10 points, and I think is maybe a little bit take or leave for that cost. Seems like it could be handy enough though if you army a squad with the plasma gauntlets and you want just a little bit of extra punch against vehicles. Just at first glance, I feel like the melee and the ranged guns are kind of close in power, so I was interested to math out exactly which targets they tended to be strongest against. Here's just a little bit of math hammer as to how much damage each type of weapon will do against a few different targets. Guardsmen, standard Space Marines, Gravis armoured Space Marines, toughness 7 vehicles, and a big hard target toughness 8 vehicle with -1 damage and a 5+ invul. For the melee weapons, I think honestly things work out to be fairly balanced between the two. The high AP Plasma Gauntlet does better against Guardsmen, Gravis Marines, and the same against the hard targets, whereas the Concussion Gauntlets outperform against standard Space Marines and Toughness 7 vehicles. Overall, I think that you could make an argument for either of them. I might be a little bit more tempted by the Plasma Blades myself. Arguably, I feel like lower strength isn't as much of a weakness in the Leagues of Votann, as you might be hitting targets with Judgment tokens, which might make you auto-wound with a fair few attacks. For the ranged weapons though, I do feel that the Vulcanite probably quite solidly wins out between the two. It is shorter range at 18 inches, but it's significantly better against some targets, and even against optimal targets the Plasma Beamer doesn't do a lot better. The Vulcanite wins against the Guardsmen and the really hard targets, the first one due to the volume shots and then the second one due to the mortal wounds. They're the same against Gravis, and the Plasma Beamer wins out very slightly against the Toughness 7 vehicle and the standard Space Marines, but not by very much. I think the big thing with the Vulcanite weapons though is that they have great synergy with other units in the book. You can very easily get 4 rerolls to hit, either with a high Carl's rerolls or the Judgment Token stratagem, and then you basically just reroll everything that isn't a 6, try and fish for those 6s to get you more mortal wounds, and it means that even a 5-man squad would average 4 or 5 mortal wounds at range, and that goes up to a massive 9 on average for a 10-man block. Just about everything in the game is going to really feel that, never mind the extra damage that you get from the regular hits as well, plus the grenades. I feel like you could still make an argument for the Plasma if you were on a foot-slogging unit moving up the board that you didn't think might get in range quite as easily, but overall I think that the Vulcanite is the better out of the two there. Otherwise, I feel like between the Teleport Crest and the Weaver Field, I would probably take the Teleport. Raw durability is no bad thing whatsoever, but being able to actually position these where you want I think does actually outweigh the benefit. Everything besides the bikes and vehicles is super slow in the Votann list, so being able to jump this unit to another part of the board is a really big deal. As mentioned before, I think that the Concussion Hammer is kind of take or leave. I think it doesn't hurt, particularly on a big squad though. Moving on to buffs and synergies, and as ever with Leagues of Votann, Judgment Tokens are going to be a big deal. Particularly on those high volume grenade launcher shots, you might be able to stack an awful lot of AP-1 auto wounds on the targets if you do have Judgment Tokens, and particularly if you also give them 4 rerolls some way. Per point between the grenade launcher and Vulcanite, they're one of the most efficient volume fire shots in the whole codex, so I think Judgment Tokens are going to be extra relevant for them. As a big core unit, they work well with most of the characters. Karls, High Karls, Uthar and the Einhyr Champion can all give them rerolls and Judgment Tokens. I think that they're particularly relevant with the Einhyr Champion, as it's already a pretty justifiable damage dealer just in its own right, never mind the fact that it can also offer these a bit of a supporting unit as well. As mentioned previously, full High Karl rerolls are spectacular with the Volkite weapons. They seem like perhaps the best target for that ability. The Grimnir can give them toughness 6 and a 6+ feel no pain. Pretty scary to have these wounded on a 5+ at strength 5 weapons, though it might not be enormously helpful against big anti-tank guns that would still be quite efficient against them anyway. The Brockhere Ironmaster is maybe generally better for vehicles and things, but he can help them out too. Can potentially give them a +1 to hit if it makes sense to, though it might be better to target other things with that. But in particular, I think that the Forge Master is really quite relevant with them. He allows them to discount Wargear stratagems, so if you were doing some sort of first turn teleport shenanigans, then it could mean that you could have that for 1 CP rather than 2. I guess the same would go for the Shield Crest stratagem as well, if you did want a bit of transhuman physiology while slogging up the board. Finally, for Warlord traits, you could get objectives secured on them, say if they were advancing alongside a Karl with that trait. That's not bad for a fairly durable unit that wants to push into the midfield. And I guess you could conceivably use the one for shooting while doing actions as well. That could allow them to do something like raising some banners while still firing off a bunch of plasma or vulcanite shots. Out of these, I think they're usually going to be a unit that's worth supporting in some way. If you are taking a massive unit of them and slogging them up the board, then I think it probably makes sense to have a bunch of characters follow in their wake while they're doing what they're doing for other units as well. Even if they're going to go teleporting off into the ether, then using the Forge Master to facilitate that doesn't seem bad, and you could throw full rerolls on them from a high Karl before they go. I guess in theory you could transport them via a land fortress as well. You can fit 5 of these models in it, and that could allow them to get to the mid-board a bit easier. I can't help but think, though, that it might be a bit better for things like Berserks or Hearthkin Warriors, perhaps a slightly cheaper threat lurking within rather than a really expensive one, and kind of doubling down on how important it is to take out that land fortress. In terms of stratagems, the Leagues of Votann do have a fairly spectacular amount of generalist ones for their core infantry, and these guys are no exception. Perhaps more so than the Hearthkin Warriors as well. I think that they are maybe a better target for these stratagems, as they're a really big points intensive unit. I think they'd certainly thank you for having a Grimnir in the list to farm up more CP to throw into the unit for raw damage or defense. There's quite a lot of really powerful notable ones. 1 CP for +1 to hit is often going to be well worth it. If you need more damage both at range or in melee, that's really easy. There's reroll hits versus a Judgment Token unit. It's great generally, but awesome with the Vulcanites. As mentioned, potentially 9 mortal wounds for a full unit at range, never mind a bit of volume fire as well. There's a 2 CP one to return fire. If the unit gets shot, then these guys can just shoot them straight back. If the enemy makes the mistake of targeting them with a unit within 18 inches, maybe just killing a model or two, then they could have that unit just brutally removed from their board with a whole bunch of Vulcanite mortal wounds and grenade launcher shots. A full turn of shooting out of a big unit is absolutely brutal for 2 CP, and if that ever comes up and you have the CP spare, it looks like it would be great. There's a 1 CP to take a relic on the squad. If you want to stack more durability, then it can get them -1 to hit. It only applies at range greater than 12 inches, but it's still handy. There's a 1 CP one for fallback and shoot. Again, if that makes sense rather than staying in melee, then that's all good. I think after taking grenade launchers into account, most of the time they're going to do more damage at range than melee, at least against infantry. Then there's the 2 crest ones. The teleport crest for 2 CP to teleport a unit round the board could allow a first turn alpha strike. And then there's the 1 or 2 CP transhuman one for a shield crest, only 1 CP for a 5-man unit. If you need some extra survivability, then it's all good. Finally, for stratagems, maybe some slightly more niche ones are 2 CP for full reroll hits in melee if there's 2 core units in engagement range with 1 enemy unit. As always with judgment tokens, never bad, but that needs a bit of setup. There's 2 CP to shoot in melee. It's pretty big if it lets you fire 5 or 10 Vulcanites, though 2 CP is a bit pricey, and it still wouldn't let you fire the grenade launchers due to the core blast rules. And then there's 1 CP for a 6+ feel no pain if you're on an objective and ignoring morale. Not a terrible defensive boost, but not a big one either. Plenty of big damage ones here though. The re-rolling hits or +1 to hit are both great. Anything that can net them an extra round of shooting is going to be brilliant. The war gear ones are both usable, and heroic intervention could punish enemy units getting too close. Next up, we've got the advantages of the different leagues, and I must admit I think all of them do offer something pretty decent to these Hearthguard, though maybe some a bit more than others. The Great Etherean League generally makes judgment tokens better, which is no bad thing with all the volume fire, plus Uthar might be around for giving them 4 rerolls to hit. The Trans-Hyperion Alliance gets you extra AP on 6s to wound, again not bad with a bunch of low AP shots with Vulcanites and the grenade launchers. As a potential big meaty unit, they might trigger the +1 to hit rule all the time if they take a casualty, and having a 5+ save against mortal wound stratagem is pretty good, as it's one of the best ways to kill this unit. Next up is the Einhyr Conglomerate, a very interesting one on these, as it is with quite a lot of units. Their guns get an extra 4-inch range, great for those short-range grenade launchers and the Vulcanites. The unit gets a 4+ invul, which will definitely help their survivability against things like melter weapons, and they get an extra pip of AP when they're within half range, which will be boosted up to 11 inches for the grenade launchers, and getting AP -2 grenades looks a lot more threatening. I feel like this just seems all around strong. If you were teleporting the unit in, then their shooting's going to be a lot more vicious with extra AP, never mind the slightly improved durability. Talking of toughness though, your Certa Regulates gives you +1 toughness, making these a very interesting toughness 6 and going up to toughness 7 if you use that fortify spell. Pretty weird to have basic infantry go all the way up to a massive toughness 7. Definitely means that you need anti-tank type weapons to try and take them out. I'd guess in a Irani Certa list then you're usually going to have a fair few vehicles anyway, so those are going to be in short supply. Finally there's the Cronus Hegemony, +1 attack, +1 strength in melee, and extra AP if you've got 2 judgment tokens. The squad's already fairly threatening at range, so this just makes them generally better in combat. I think all 3 of those buffs are pretty handy both on the gauntlets or on the blades. Particularly if you do throw those couple of judgment tokens into the mix, they're looking like a genuinely scary melee threat, rather than one that's a little bit more passable. They've even got an exploding 6s to hit stratagem if you need to double down with even more damage. To be honest, out of all the leagues, I think they seem pretty much fine in any of them. I think perhaps the ones where they're unusually stand out though might be the Emirs for the extra range and the AP, and Cronus as they're a melee unit, whereas the Votann don't really have all that many combat units, so I feel like they're going to be particularly relevant there. Moving on, here's just one idea for a squad build, which I did mention previously on the channel. At least on paper, here's a big and scary Alpha Strike type unit, 350 points for a squad of 10. They take the Vulcanite Disintegrator and the Grenade Launcher for a lot of shots at close range. Your choice of melee weapon, I really could be persuaded either way, and then the Teleport Crest to get them up the board. I'd aim for these guys to be starting next to a High Carl and a Brockier Forge Master who are buffing other units, and then turn 1 have the High Carl give the unit the full rerolls, the Brockier Forge Master discount their War Gear stratagem, and then pay 1 CP to jump them elsewhere on the board, giving you a first turn shooting Alpha Strike. That'll give you 30 Vulcanite shots to fish for those 6s for, averaging 9 mortal wounds at range, and then when you've taken into account the rerolls, you'd average just over 30 Strength 4 AP -1 hits, and around 12 extra Strength 5 AP 0 hits. Add that to the average mortal wound output, and you're looking at something like 8 or 9 dead Space Marines, 4 to 5 dead Terminators, and 15 wounds to a toughness 7 vehicle that doesn't care at all about -1 damage. It's definitely a pretty expensive unit, but that still seems like a massively brutal first punch. Then of course you've got a fairly tanky unit in a pretty threatening position, plus you can always attempt to charge as well. 9-inch out of Deep Strike would give you a 48% chance with a CP reroll, and if you happen to get lucky, then that's a whole load more melee hurt handed out in the same turn. So overall, I'd say that they do seem like a pretty scary unit that's got some good use, and quite a lot of solid advantages going for them. They're the biggest, scariest core unit in the book, normally a very good thing for good synergies with characters and stratagems and things. The teleport option brings much needed mobility to the Votann army. Some armies will really struggle to kill them with the toughness 5 and the 2+ void armor save, though maybe some more than others. Their range threat is genuinely dangerous with a little bit of support. They can pump out a lot of mortal wounds when needed, which is always going to be a good thing. They are a melee capable unit as well, which is pretty great in the Leagues of Votann, who don't really have many besides these, the berserks and characters. And as well as the big teleport punch type squad, I think you could also justify a foot slogging squad, maybe swapping out for the plasma, taking a shield crest, and have the on the board character support for rerolls and things, maybe Auspex too. I think they do have their downsides though. They are very slow if they're not teleporting. If they advance, they give up all their shooting, and it might mean that the opponent can know that they can ignore them for a turn or two while they focus on the rest of the army. While the 2+ save is great, some weapons will still kill them very easily for the cost. Anything with decent AP, damage 3 or damage 1 will chew through them pretty efficiently, as will mortal wounds. Finally, I would say that outside of Cronus, their melee is kind of merely okay. It's just not really all that impressive for the points, and I think that you have to get good value out of the close range shooting, and maybe just see the melee as a bit of a bonus. Overall though, I would say that they're solidly usable. There aren't really any other units like them in the book. I'm not sure every list will be auto-including a unit of these, but somewhere between 1 and 2 units does seem very takeable. They make some of the best use of the supporting options from the HQs. So anyway, let me know what you think down in the comments below. How strong are these guys looking for the Votann, and how would you be looking to field them in games? Stay tuned for more like this, and feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics if you'd like to see more Votann reviews. I'll hopefully be aiming to do a few more like this for the other units in the book over the next week or so. Finally, if you have been enjoying all the videos on the channel, I would just like to mention that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page as well, and you can find that down in the video description below. The channel's Patreon is what allows me to keep on making videos like this quite so regularly, so any support there is enormously appreciated if you are enjoying all the content. Channel patrons do get a fair few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things come next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.